There is a hen's wing feather stuck to the wire on the north corner of my run this morning, and there is no hen missing that feather, because she is dead, up on the hill, and the fox that took her never set one paw inside my run to do it. She was killed through the mesh itself, standing 2 inches back from a fence she thought was keeping her safe. That happened to my neighbour 3 weeks ago, not to me. And the difference between his run and mine cost about £80 in scrap timber, mesh and rebar from the merchant. And I have not lost a bird to a predator in 19 years. It is not a shed-bought run delivered flat pack for £400 or £500. It is not electric poultry netting that fails the day the leisure battery goes flat. It is not a coil of chicken wire stapled round 4 fence posts and a prayer. It is not a motion light a fox works out inside a week. It is not a dog you have to keep loose all winter to feel safe. It does one thing. My name is Angus Douglas. I croft the same ground my great-grandfather crofted on the west coast. 5th generation on it. 340 ewes on the hill. 41 lambings behind me, and I keep 20 hens in a run I built with my own hands the year my first flock got hit. I have not lost a bird to a fox, a pine marten, or a bird of prey in 19 years, not since the winter I built this thing, and my knuckles are still stiff from the wire this morning. My wife says I have more rebar in that shed than any sane man needs, and here is the part that should needle you a bit. The poultry supply catalogues will sell you a run marked predator-proof for £400 or £500 delivered to your door, and I have had the mesh off one of those kits in my own 2 hands, and it is the same gauge chicken wire a fox goes through like wet paper. You are not paying for steel. You are paying for the word predator-proof printed on the side of the box. By the end of this you will know how to build a run that has stopped a fox, a pine marten and a bird of prey for the price of 1 trip to the merchant. You will know what the underground threat actually looks like and why most folk never think of it until they have lost a bird to it. And you will know why the thing that kills more hens in this country than the fox does is something almost nobody names. Stay with me. Let me tell you the one thing that makes the rest of this make sense. A predator does not go over your fence, and he does not go through your fence. He goes wherever your fence is weakest, and weak is not the same thing as low. A 6-foot fence with 1 soft corner is worse than a 4-foot fence with none, because a predator is not testing your fence for height. He is testing it for the one place you did not think about. A fox will walk the whole perimeter of a run 4 or 5 nights running before he commits to anything. Nose down, working every seam, every join, every place 2 different builders' work meets. And he is not looking for the weakest material. He is looking for the weakest thought, the corner where you were tired, the join where you ran out of the good mesh and finished with what was left in the shed. That is the whole of predator proofing. It is not building something strong. It is building something with no soft thought anywhere in it, because he only needs the one. My grandfather built his first hen run the winter after the war with what was on the croft: driftwood posts off the shore, wire off an old army surplus roll that came off a lorry at the pier, and it kept the hens in fine. And it lasted 3 years before a fox found the one corner where the wire met the byre wall, and there was a 2-inch gap nobody had ever noticed because nobody had ever needed to look. He lost 11 birds in one night, and he never once, in the 40 years after that, built another run without doing the one thing that night taught him. He buried the wire, every single time, a foot down and a foot out, and folk on this glen still call that the boat wire lesson, because it was the boat wire roll that let him down. Not because the wire was bad, because nobody had thought about what was underneath it. I had my own version of that lesson 22 years later, and it was not the ground that caught me out, it was the air. I had a good fence up by then, mesh buried proper, the apron dug the way my grandfather taught me, and I thought I was finished. And one afternoon in my 3rd summer with hens, I heard a noise off the run I had never heard before, a kind of low panicked scatter, and I got there in time to see a buzzard sat on top of my own mesh roof frame, which had no mesh in it yet, because I had told myself a roof was for folk with proper trouble, not for a run this size, tucked in against a byre wall. She had one of my pullets by the shoulder through a gap where the frame met the wall, and she let go and lifted off when I came round the corner shouting, and the bird lived. But she carried a scar under her wing feathers for the rest of her days, and I never once again told myself a threat was too small to plan for. That was the summer I put the roof on, and it has been on every run I have built since. The lesson cost me one frightened pullet and a bad half hour, My grandfather's lesson cost him 11 birds in a night, and between the two of us, that is most of what this whole video is built on. So let me tell you what is actually happening with each of the 3 threats, because once you understand the why, you will never build it wrong again. The aerial threat is a bird of prey in this country that is mostly a buzzard, sometimes a sparrowhawk if your birds are small. And here is what most folk get wrong about it. They think the danger is a hawk swooping down onto an open run, and it can happen. But the far more common way you lose a bird to the air is through the wire itself. A hen presses up against the fence because that is where the cover is. A buzzard comes down onto the mesh from above, and talons go straight through a 2-inch square and take hold of whatever is pressed against the other side. The fence did not fail, the gap did. The fix is not a bigger fence. The fix is mesh small enough that nothing can reach through it, and a roof over the top so nothing lands on it in the first place. The direct threat is a fox, a pine marten, sometimes a badger, and this is where chicken wire fails you completely, and I want you to understand why. Because it is not folklore. Chicken wire is a thin, soft, hexagonal weave. It was built to keep a hen in. It was never built to keep anything out. A fox has jaws that will chew through it in under a minute. A badger will simply tear it with his claws. What you want instead is called weld mesh, sometimes hardware cloth, a rigid welded grid, and the aperture matters more than the thickness, ½ an inch square or smaller, because anything bigger than that is a door to a stoat or a weasel. 16 gauge is plenty for most of you, heavier if you have badgers working your ground already. And I will say a word here about the pine marten specifically, because he is not the same animal as a fox, and he does not test a fence the same way. A marten climbs the way a squirrel climbs. He does not need a gap at ground level at all if your walls give him a paw hold and your roof is open, which is exactly why the roof matters as much for a marten as it does for a bird of prey. Martens were scarce on this coast when my grandfather was a young man, and they have come back over my own lifetime. Folk here will tell you their numbers are well up on what they were a generation ago, and I have no exact figure I would put my name to on that. The old accounts simply agree that there are more of them about now than there used to be, and a fence built to stop a fox alone is not built to stop a marten, because a marten treats your wall as a ladder, not a barrier. And one more honest word on the badger. He is a powerful digging animal, and he can, if truly determined, tear even good mesh given enough hours undisturbed. But he is also a protected animal under law in this country, the same as a bird of prey. You cannot trap him, you cannot harm him. Exclusion is your only lawful tool with a badger, just as it is with a buzzard, which is one more reason the fence has to be right the first time, because removing the problem is never an option open to you. The underground threat is the one nobody thinks about until they have already paid for it. A fox does not need to get over your fence or through it if he can go under it, and he will dig patiently in the same spot over several nights, and the fix is called an apron. You bury mesh a foot down at the base of the fence, and here is the part that matters. You bend it outward, away from the run, not straight down. Why outward and not straight down? Because a digging fox works close against the base of the fence where he can feel it with his nose. He digs down right at the wire, and if your buried mesh only goes straight down, he simply digs alongside it and finds the bottom edge eventually. If it bends outward instead, he hits solid mesh no matter where along that line he chooses to dig. And here is the moment the title of this video gets paid in full. That 80-pound run I told you about at the start, that is the whole of it. Mesh small enough for nothing to reach through, buried and turned outward so nothing can dig under, and a roof so nothing lands from above. That is what stops a fox, a marten and a buzzard with one system, and it took me one weekend to build. Now before I get into it, one thing and one time only. There is more of this than I can fit in any video. How to read a hen 3 days before she goes down. How to feed a flock off your own ground, month by month, winter included. What to handle yourself in the byre and what to lift the phone for. How my grandfather did the things he never wrote down. Every method I've never given out, I put all of it in a book at angusdouglaspoultry.com. Link in my description or scan the code on your screen. That is the only time you will hear me say it. Now let us get back to the video. Now, before I get into the actual building of it, I want to give something back, because I have just told you chicken wire is no good, and that is not the whole truth. Chicken wire is not useless. It is exactly the right thing for keeping your hens where you want them during the day. It is cheap and it is light, and it does that job perfectly well. My mistake for years was using it for the wrong job. Keeping hens in and keeping predators out are two completely different pieces of work, and I used one material to try and do both. If you already have a chicken wire run and you are not ready to rebuild the whole thing, you can keep the chicken wire as your inner visible fence and add the weld mesh as a second skin around the base and the vulnerable corners. That costs a fraction of a full rebuild, and it closes the gap that actually matters. Right, here is exactly how you build it, in order. So let us get to the boards. First, your posts. 4x4 timber or good round fence posts. Set 2 foot into the ground and set in concrete if you can spare it. 6 foot above ground at minimum, because a fox can clear a 4-foot fence without much effort at all. Why 6 foot and not 4? Because a fox that has to jump gets a run up, and a run up needs open ground on the far side. 6 foot with a slight overhang at the top defeats that run up entirely. Second, your mesh. Buy 16 gauge weld mesh. 1/2-inch square aperture from any agricultural merchant. You and I will use the word galvanized because plain steel rusts through in a couple of winters on this coast. Expect to pay somewhere in the region of £30 to £40 for enough to wrap a run the size of mine. Staple it to the posts with galvanized fencing staples every 3 or 4 inches. Why every 3 or 4 inches and not further apart? Because a fox that finds one loose corner will work at it all night, and a loose corner is the same as no corner at all. Third, the apron. And this is the step folks skip because it is the hardest work and the least visible once it is done. Dig a trench a foot deep around the entire perimeter. A spade's width is plenty. Lay your mesh down into that trench so it runs from the base of your fence down the inside wall of the trench and then bends outward along the bottom for another foot before you backfill over it. You and I are doing the same job here. You dig your trench a foot down and a foot out before the ground freezes in the autumn. Mine gets dug the weekend before lambing starts every year, because that is the only free weekend I get all spring. Why does the bend matter more than the depth? Because a fox rarely digs more than 8 or 10 inches down before giving up on a straight vertical barrier. But he will dig right alongside it forever, if there is nothing stopping him sideways. The outward bend means wherever he digs, he hits mesh. And one practical word for those of you on ground that freezes hard in winter, the way mine does. Dig your apron trench in the autumn while the ground is still workable, because a frozen foot of soil in January will blunt a spade and your temper both. And frost heave over a hard winter can lift a shallow apron if it is not buried the full depth, which is one more reason a foot down is the minimum and not a target to fall short of. Fourth, your roof. And you do not need solid roofing. Weld mesh over the top works the same as the walls, or heavy-duty netting if the span is wide. The point is nothing lands on your run from above, and nothing climbs over the top and drops in. Why mesh over the whole top, and not just netting round the edges? Because a pine marten climbs, and a bird of prey does not need much of a gap to get a talon through. And I will tell you plainly, this is the step I skipped myself the summer the buzzard took hold of my pullet. Do not make the mistake I made. Fifth, your gate. Hang it so it closes flush against the frame, with no gap wider than an inch anywhere along the edge, and fit a proper latch, not a simple hook, because a fox nudging at a gate for 20 minutes a night will eventually work a loose hook loose. Why does the gate matter as much as the fence? Because every predator that has ever got into a well-built run got in through the one part of it a human opens and closes every single day. The door is always the weak thought. Sixth, and this is the one common mistake that ruins the whole job. Do not build the run and forget the corners where it meets a wall, a shed, or another structure. That is exactly where my grandfather lost his birds. Any place 2 different builds join is a seam, and a seam is a gap waiting to be found. Seal every seam the same way you sealed the rest. Mesh, buried, bent outward, and I will tell you, the gate on my own run took me 3 attempts to hang properly. The first one dropped on its hinge within a month and left a gap at the bottom you could have posted a letter through. My wife still brings it up whenever she wants to remind me that I do not always get things right the first time, and she is entitled to. Seventh, and this one is not essential but I run it anyway. A single strand of electric poultry wire set low round the outside of the fence, 6 inches off the ground. Why low and not at nose height for a man? Because you are not trying to stop a fox from touching your fence. You are trying to make the ground right in front of it unpleasant to work at. A fox that gets a nose full of a mild shock while he is trying to dig loses interest in that spot far quicker than one who is simply looking at solid mesh. It is a belt on top of braces, not the braces themselves. Do not rely on it alone. A flat battery on the coldest night of the year is the night a determined fox chooses to try again, and a wire with no charge in it stops nothing at all. Eighth, and this is the one folk never think to do before they build anything. Look at where you are putting the run before you put a single post in the ground. A run set hard against a hedge line, a ditch, or a stand of trees is a run set on a fox's own travel corridor. He is walking that line every night, whether your hens are there or not. Why does sighting matter if the fence itself is sound? Because a fence gets tested far more often by an animal that already passes that spot every night than by one that has to go out of his way to find you, moving a run 20 feet further from the tree line. Onto open ground he has to cross to reach, costs you nothing, and cuts the number of nights he even bothers checking your fence at all. My own run sits in the open middle of the yard for exactly this reason, in full view of the house, and my wife says it spoils the look of the garden, and I have told her the garden can look spoiled for as long as we keep hens. Now I owe you the honest scope of this, because I will not tell you a bold thing and let you find out the truth on your own. This does not stop a badger who is truly determined and has all night with nothing better to do. Weld mesh will slow him and usually turn him away, but a hungry badger with claws like his can, given hours, tear even good mesh if he decides your run is worth the effort. This does not replace you checking the fence. A run that gets torn in a storm and is not mended within a day is not a predator-proof run anymore. It is a predator-proof run with a hole in it. And this does not stop disease coming in on your own boots, which has nothing to do with fences at all. And if you back onto heavy woodland with real pine marten pressure, you may want 1/4-inch mesh instead of 1/2 inch, because a marten is a smaller, more determined animal than a fox. And one more honest word, none of this replaces watching your own birds. A fence keeps out what is outside it. It does not tell you a hen has stopped eating, or is sitting hunched in the corner. That is a different kind of watching altogether, and it matters just as much. Honest is better than impressive. Now here is the thing that is not in anybody else's version of this, and it is the reason I said at the start that a fox is not the thing that kills the most birds in this country. It is a stoat, or a weasel, and here is why nobody talks about them. They are small, they are shy, they are rarely seen, so when a whole flock is found dead in a morning, folk blame the fox because the fox is the animal they can picture doing it. But a stoat can pass through a gap 1 inch across, the width of your thumb, and once inside a run he will very often kill far more birds than he could ever eat in one sitting. It is called surplus killing. It is instinct, not hunger, and it means one stoat getting through one 1-inch gap can wipe out a flock of 20 birds in a single night while barely feeding on any of them. That is the reason 1/2-inch mesh matters more than the size of the animal you are picturing when you build this. You are not building a fence to stop a fox. You are building a fence with no gap bigger than 1 inch anywhere in it, and the fox happens to be stopped by the same fence that was really built for something much smaller and much less talked about. And here is the part that took me longest to understand about that. A stoat does not need a gap in your mesh at all. He needs a gap where 2 pieces of your build meet under a gatepost, round a pipe that runs through the fence line, along the bottom of a door frame. So when you check your build for gaps, do not just look at the mesh itself, look at every place something else passes through it. Now, I know the question some of you will have, because they come in every time. The first is, but foxes can clear a 6-foot fence if they are determined. And that is true, which is exactly why the roof is not optional. A run with tall walls and no roof is not a predator-proof run. It is a very tall predator-proof run with the lid left off. The second is the buried apron really necessary? My run has never been dug under, and I will tell you honestly, you will not know it is necessary until the morning you find out it was. The apron cost you 1 afternoon of digging. The alternative cost you your flock, and the lesson my grandfather learnt the hard way. The third is the one that matters most, and it is not about a fox at all. Some of you will show this to your father or the man at the farm supply counter, and he will tell you chicken wire has always been good enough. He is not lying to you. Chicken wire has kept hens in a run for 80 years. It does that job perfectly. But keeping hens in and keeping predators out were never the same job, and nobody ever sat him down and separated the two. He built what he was taught, and what he was taught was never wrong for what it was meant to do. Here are 7 things 19 years of building and rebuilding this run have taught me that nobody puts in a fencing catalogue. 1. A fox tests a fence for several nights running before he commits to breaking in. If your run survives the first fortnight after you build it, he has very likely moved on to easier ground. 2. Buzzards. Sparrowhawks and every bird of prey in this country are protected by law. You cannot shoot one, you cannot trap one, and honestly you would not want to. Exclusion is the only tool you are legally allowed, and it is also the only tool that actually works long term. 3. A fox will very rarely dig where the ground is disturbed and freshly smells of you. Working your run yourself once a week, turning the soil at the edges, keeps a fox uneasy about the whole perimeter. 4. You do not need to buy new timber for a footer. An old offcut of roofing felt or a strip of driftwood laid along the base before you bury your apron does the same job as anything bought new. 5. A run that has never been tested by a predator feels like money wasted right up until the night it is not. That feeling is the whole reason folks skip the apron and the roof, and it is the reason my grandfather lost 11 birds. 6. The smell of a dead or injured bird left in or near a run draws every predator in the district for a good half-mile. If you ever lose a bird, clean the ground properly and do not leave so much as a feather where it fell. 7. The quietest night of the year, the still, dry, windless kind, is the night a fox moves furthest and tests the most fences, because sound carries and he can hear you long before he ever sees you. A wet, windy night is safer for your flock than a calm one, which is the opposite of what most folk would guess. And 8. The single cheapest thing you can do this week costs nothing at all. Walk your own fence line at dusk, on foot, slowly, the way a fox would approach it. Get down at his eye level in the corners and look for daylight where there should not be any. Most of the gaps that end up costing somebody their flock were visible the whole time to anybody who actually crouched down and looked instead of walking past upright at eye level for a person, which is a different eye level entirely from the one the problem shows itself at. Now, I want to take a moment because this is the part that matters. Think about what those flat-pack, predator-proof runs actually cost. £400 or £500 delivered, against roughly £80 in mesh, timber and rebar from the merchant, and 1 weekend of your own labour. And think about who benefits from you not knowing the difference. The agricultural suppliers, of course, but nobody sat in a room and decided to sell you chicken wire dressed up in a predator-proof box. I am not telling you there was a meeting somewhere. I do not believe in that. It is quieter than that. A company that sells you a run built to the standard that actually keeps things out has to charge you for proper materials. And a company that sells you a cheaper looking product with a stronger sounding name sells more units. Nobody had to plan it. The market simply rewards whichever one moves off the shelf faster, and the honest version of predator-proof has never once had a marketing budget behind it. And there is a second trade that profits too. The pest control firms who will come out and set traps for a fox or a marten after the damage is already done, charging you by the call-out, every time, forever. There is no money in a fence that works. There is money in a service you call again next spring. Multiply either of those across every household in this country keeping a handful of hens, and you are talking about a genuinely large sum of money changing hands every year for a problem that a foot of buried mesh and 1 weekend would have solved permanently. None of it needs a conspiracy to explain it. It only needs everybody involved to have no reason at all to mention the cheaper way. Think about the wider cost too. A hill farmer or a crofter on a pension who loses 6 birds in one night to a fox that found the one gap he never checked is not just out the price of 6 hens. He is out the eggs those birds would have given him for years, and at 90 minutes from anybody who could have helped him figure out why it happened, he is left thinking his birds were simply unlucky, when the truth was a 2-inch gap he never looked at because nobody ever told him to look. And I think of the older folk on this glen, some of them keeping half a dozen hens for the company as much as the eggs, who cannot dig a trench a foot deep the way they once could, and who lose a bird every autumn, and simply accept it as the cost of keeping hens at all. When the truth is their fence has one gap that a younger neighbour could fix for them in an afternoon, And it is not only the very old who are exposed here. More folk than ever before are keeping a handful of hens in a garden now, in a town, on a small holding of an acre or two. Folk who never grew up round a fence and were never shown what a predator actually does to one. And at the very same time the animals doing the testing, the fox and the marten both, have grown more used to living close to people than they were a generation ago, which means more fences are being tested by more confident animals than at any point most of us can remember. And the folk building those fences are, on the whole, working from a picture on a box rather than from anybody who has actually lost birds and learnt why. You did not forget how to build a proper run. Most of you were simply never shown it in the first place. It was quietly replaced by a catalogue and a delivery van. So here is your homework for this week, in 5 lines. First, replace any chicken wire around your run with 1/2-inch weld mesh, especially at the base and the corners. Second, dig your apron a foot down and a foot out, bent away from the run, not straight down. Third, cover the top with mesh or heavy netting so nothing lands or climbs in. Fourth, fit a proper latch to your gate and check every seam where your run joins any other structure. And fifth, walk your fence once a week the same way you would check anything else on the place. Total cost around £80. Total time 1 weekend, against 400 or 500 for a kit that uses chicken wire dressed up in a stronger name. Tell me in the comments below what county you are in and what actually gets your birds where you live. A fox, a marten, a buzzard, something else entirely. I read every one of these, and if a hen or a cockerel of yours has ever come off worse in a fight through a fence and she is still alive but torn, that is not something you patch yourself. That is a vet this week, not a video. Next time, since we have been on the subject of what actually gets a hen in this country, I am going to show you how to read your own flock at dusk. The small change in how they move to the shed that tells you a predator has already found your fence and is working it. Most folk never notice it until the morning after. It is the natural next step after today. If you got something useful out of this one, subscribe and the next will find you on its own. There is another sat there on the screen that goes right along with it. Feed them right, watch them close, ring for help when it matters.